You are 41 and you have $1 million in assets, most of it in real estate, equities, and a private business stake. Inflation was reported at 4.1% this year. You read the headline the same way everyone did, but your net worth grew 11.2%. Your largest asset appreciated faster than the inflation rate by a factor of 3. And the debt you're carrying on that asset is getting cheaper in real terms every single month it exists. You are holding a coffee that cost $1.89 15 years ago and costs $4.20 today. You barely noticed the increase happen. It happened in increments too small to register individually and too large to ignore in aggregate. By the end of this video, you'll definitely see that inflation isn't one thing happening to everyone equally. It's a sequence of effects that hits people in a specific order, and the order is determined entirely by how close you are to where new money enters the system. You'll find out exactly where you sit in that sequence, and it explains more about your financial life than your salary ever has. This is how inflation treats you, from $100 to $1 million. Level 1. $100. You are 22 and you have $100 in a checking account. You don't think about inflation. Nobody at this level does, structurally, because thinking about it requires a buffer large enough to absorb the difference between this month's prices and last month's prices, and you have no buffer. You experience inflation the way most people at this level experience it, as a vague sense that things cost more than they used to, without the data or the time to quantify it. Your rent increases $60 a month at renewal. Your grocery bill, for the same items, is $34 higher than it was 8 months ago. Your hourly wage has not moved. You are working the same job, the same hours, for the same nominal pay, while the actual purchasing power of that pay has quietly eroded by an amount you can feel but can't easily measure. This is the textbook position of what economists call the Cantillon effect, named after Richard Cantillon, an 18th century economist who first described how new money, entering an economy, doesn't distribute evenly. It enters at specific points, benefits the people closest to those points first, and arrives at people like you last, by which time prices have already adjusted upward in response to the money that arrived before you ever saw a dollar of it. You don't know this term yet. You just know that $100 buys less every year, and you don't understand why your effort doesn't seem to keep pace with it. You open a savings account with a 0.4% interest rate. The bank is, in real terms, paying you to lose money slower than you'd lose it under your mattress, while inflation runs at 3 to 4% annually. You don't calculate this. You just feel, vaguely, that saving doesn't seem to be working the way you were told it would. The first rule, at $100, inflation is not a number you read about. It's a force acting on you with no countermeasure available, because countermeasures require capital you don't have yet. Level 2. $10,000. You are 25 and you have $10,000 saved. For the first time, you have enough to ask the question seriously. Where does this money actually go to not lose value? You open a brokerage account and put $6,000 into a broad index fund, leaving $4,000 in a high-yield savings account now paying 4.2%. Still likely below true inflation in any given year, but closer than the 0.4% you were getting before. You start to notice the asymmetry more clearly. Your rent has gone up again. Your wage has gone up too, finally, by 5% at your annual review, which feels like progress until you calculate that cumulative inflation over the same period was closer to 11%. You got a raise and got poorer in real terms simultaneously, a fact almost nobody explains to you at the moment the raise is announced. You also notice something about debt for the first time. A friend mentions, almost in passing, that he's not in a rush to pay off his car loan early because the interest rate is fixed at 4% and inflation is running higher than that most years, meaning the bank is effectively losing value on what he owes them every month he doesn't pay it off faster. You think about this for a long time. It's the first time debt has been described to you as something other than purely bad. You don't act on it yet. You don't have an asset large enough to make the strategy meaningful. But you've started to see the shape of something, that the people who benefit from inflation aren't the ones holding cash. They're the ones holding assets and debt simultaneously, in the right proportion. The second rule, at $10,000, you start to see the mechanism. Seeing it and having the capital to exploit it are two different stages, and the gap between them is where most people stay stuck the longest. Level 3, $50,000. You are 28 and you have $50,000 across investments and savings. You buy your first investment property this year, a small condo, $180,000, financed with a 20% down payment pulled partly from this $50,000 and partly from savings built specifically for this purpose. The mortgage rate is fixed at 6.1% for 30 years. This single decision puts you, for the first time, on the correct side of the Cantillon effect in a structural way. Inflation erodes the real value of your fixed mortgage payment every year it continues. The rent you charge a tenant, meanwhile, rises with inflation. Your income on the asset adjusts upward while your cost of holding it stays fixed. You are now benefiting from the same force that was eroding your $100 paycheck 6 years ago. This is also exactly where the mechanics of real estate as an inflation hedge connect to something I broke down in full detail in another video: the complete 6-level breakdown of how the real estate market itself treats you differently depending on your capital, from your first $87,000 deal to a $500 million portfolio, and why property is one of the only asset classes that lets an ordinary person stand on the correct side of inflation using borrowed money. That full breakdown is in the video appearing right now. But for now, let's stay with what happens to your specific position as your asset base continues to grow. Your wage income is still being eroded by inflation at the same rate as everyone else's. But for the first time, you have a second income stream, the property, that is structurally positioned to benefit from the exact force damaging your paycheck. The third rule, at $50,000, you cross from being purely a victim of inflation to being partially insulated from it. The insulation isn't automatic. It required a specific decision to convert savings into an asset financed with fixed-rate debt. Level 4, $100,000. You are 31 and your net worth crosses 6 figures, split between the property equity, a growing investment account, and cash reserves. You refinance the condo this year, rates having dropped slightly, and pull out $14,000 in equity through the refinance, a process that is, functionally, tax-free borrowing against an asset that appreciated due in significant part to the same inflation that's been quietly taxing your paycheck for 9 years. You deploy the $14,000 into a second small investment, a stake in a private real estate syndication that targets multifamily properties specifically because multifamily rents reprice frequently, giving the investment built-in inflation responsiveness that a fixed-rate bond, for example, would not have. You begin to understand the layered structure of who benefits and who doesn't. The bondholder who locked in a 30-year fixed rate 5 years ago at 3% is losing real value every year inflation runs above that rate. A bond is one of the worst possible assets to hold during a high inflation period, because its payment is fixed and its real value erodes with certainty. You, holding hard assets financed with fixed-rate debt, are positioned almost exactly opposite to the bondholder. Your friend from level 2, who still hasn't bought anything, has watched his cash savings lose roughly 19% of their purchasing power over 6 years of moderate inflation, while his wage gains never quite caught up. He's not poor, he's just been standing on the wrong side of the mechanism the entire time, doing everything that felt responsible, saving diligently, avoiding debt, while the system quietly rewarded the opposite behavior. The fourth rule, at $100,000, you start actively choosing your position relative to the mechanism, rather than passively absorbing whatever side you happen to land on. Level 5, $500,000. You are 36 and your net worth is $500,000 across 2 properties, an equity portfolio, and a stake in a small business venture. You notice at this level that the people closest to the actual creation of new money, banks, large asset holders, anyone who can borrow at institutional rates before that money has worked its way through the broader economy, get to deploy that capital into assets before prices have adjusted upward in response. By the time the money reaches the broader public as wage increases, the assets it would have purchased have already repriced higher. This is the Cantillon effect in its full form. You're no longer at the end of that chain, but you're not at the beginning either. You're in the middle, close enough to access cheap, institutional adjacent credit through a business line, far enough that you still feel the squeeze on discretionary spending when grocery prices move. A market downturn occurs this year, a 14% correction across equities over 4 months. Your portfolio drops in nominal terms. But the same downturn, paired with persistent inflation, means several of your fixed-rate debts are now effectively cheaper in real terms than they were 18 months ago, partially offsetting the equity loss in a way that wouldn't exist if you held no debt at all. You start to understand that the goal was never to avoid inflation. The goal was to position your balance sheet so inflation works for roughly as much of it as works against it, and to keep shifting that ratio over time as your access to capital and information improves. The fifth rule, at $500,000, inflation stops being a single force and becomes something closer to a negotiation, conducted through your balance sheet rather than your paycheck. Level 6. $1 million. You were 41, and your net worth crosses 7 figures. The assets distributed across real estate, equities, and the business stake that has grown into something with real cash flow. You sit at your kitchen table with the coffee that now costs $4.20, the same brand you bought for $1.89 15 years ago, and you do the calculation properly for the first time. Not the headline inflation number everyone quotes, but your specific exposure. Your largest asset, the real estate, appreciated at roughly 6.8% annually over the past decade, well above the 3.1% average inflation rate over the same period. Your fixed-rate debt on that asset has had its real burden reduced every single year. Your business stake generates revenue that adjusts with pricing power, meaning its cash flow keeps pace with inflation almost automatically. Your overall net worth grew 11.2% this year against 4.1% reported inflation. You are, in the language economists use, without quite saying it plainly, on the early side of the Cantillon chain now. Close enough to capital and assets that new money entering the economy tends to lift what you hold before it lifts the price of what you buy. You think about the version of yourself at 22, with $100 in a checking account, feeling the vague erosion of purchasing power without the language or capital to name it or counter it. The mechanism acting on him and the mechanism acting on you now are the same mechanism. What changed wasn't the mechanism, it was your position relative to it. Somewhere, right now, someone has $100 in a checking account and a rent increase they didn't see coming, and a wage that isn't moving fast enough to keep up with anything. They think the problem is that they don't earn enough. That's not quite it. The problem is that they're standing at the far end of a chain that was never going to treat them the way it treats the people standing closer to where the money actually enters. The fix isn't only earning more. The fix is understanding the chain well enough to start moving your position within it, converting cash into assets, understanding which debts are your enemy and which ones, structured correctly, become your ally. The coffee will keep getting more expensive. The question that actually matters is whether you'll be holding the thing that benefits from that or just paying for it.